Hello, my name is Wilfred Edwards Oldham.
Where and when were you born?
I was born on the 28th of August in the city of Salford, which is in Lancashire, England. 28th of August 1920.
So how old are you right now?
I'm 99 now, sir.
Do you feel like you're 99?
Well, some days I feel a lot older. I try not to behave like a 99-year-old. My memory's quite good and clear yet.
Physically, what is it like to be 99?
I really can't describe it, only it's a matter of the body getting older and not being able to do the things I could only 12 months ago, probably.
And tell me, Mr. Oldham, what branch of the military were you in during the Second World War?
During the Second World War, I was in the army. I was an army man.
And tell me, sir, what specific units were you a part of?
Well, when I first went in the army, which was the autumn of 1940, I volunteered because I was ready for being called up to the colours. I was just 20 then, and I went to join up, and I was in an infantry unit called the East Lancashire Regiment. And I did the training had to be a lot less than it is today. You're more, because of the war, they hadn't as much time to train us up. So I was in the East Lancashire Regiment, and from there I went in 3 or 4 different infantry regiments, and late 1941, the unit I belonged to then we were stationed at a place called Swanage in Dorset. And from there, in the notice board, which you had to read before you went for your evening meal, they put the notice up: volunteers wanted for airborne forces, parachutist or glider-borne soldier. So I volunteered along with another friend of mine, and a few weeks after I went to a place called Dorset to be interviewed, and there was quite a lot beside me being interviewed, and they got the waiting list for the parachute to be a parachutist was quite high. Well, they said, if you still want to be an airborne soldier, you could join, if you're up to measurements, you could be accepted in a glider-borne battalion. So back to Swanage we went, and then after about 5 weeks, we had to go and see the commanding officer, me and this other fella, and we were posted to a camp called Barton Stacey. It's near Andover in Hampshire. And what you did there, you had no parachute training, nothing like that. You had 5 weeks to prove that you was fit as a human being could be. And then if it was accepted, you either returned to unit or was accepted, and then I was made a member then of the 1st Battalion, the Border Regiment. And there was one battalion of a brigade of 3 glider-borne battalions. So after 5 weeks then, I was, as I said, I was accepted, and I joined 12th Platoon of B Company. And from there it was long and weary route marches, learning specialist, all infantry weapons, for instance the rifle, the 2-inch mortar, the boy's anti-tank rifle, and after 5 weeks, when I was as fit as it were possible to be, then and only then was I was a member of this glider-borne battalion. And after a few weeks, each platoon in its turn went to an aerodrome and to see what your flying capacities were like. Now, I don't think the Horsa glider, which was the war horse of the British Glider Battalion glider-borne soldiers, and there was a called the Hotspur. There was a practice glider, and you went. You were took to the room and took up. I think they only held 5 men and a glider pilot, and you was probably flying for about half an hour to see if you suffered from air sickness, which some people did, or whether you you didn't want to be. You found out that you were frightened in the glider or frightened up in the air. So you did so many hours over a period of about 3 months, and then when you'd done so many hours, you was then awarded a badge, a cloth badge you wore on the bottom of your sleeve on your jacket, and it was a glider on a background. And I think we did glider exercises. Now, well, this period I'm talking about, then I think that was when the British glider called the Hawser, which held a full platoon of probably 28 men and 2 glider pilots, and they were towed by an American warhorse called the Dakota or the C-47, and you was taken by transport or marched maybe many miles to the aerodrome, and then you was directed to which glider you went to, and you were given a seat, and that seat, you always sat in the same seat every exercise we went on. And probably the first few times in a hawser, we was only up in the air about an hour, and then you landed when the tug plane has a cord through the rope which tugs the glider, and the the pilots of the aircraft will then tell the pilots of the glider, you're over your landing zone, cast off now. He pressed the plunger, it undid the hooks on each wing, which was the glider pilot rope, the glider's rope, and tug rope, and then you could come down almost straight. It was a strange feeling. Now, a lot of men were sick, and some even was that sick by flying glide as they were sent back to the infantry battalions. So we had this, and then we did company exercises with gliders, then battalion exercises, then brigade exercises, and then the full-blown 1st Airborne Division. And it was maybe when I'd been in this glider battalion, that's when airborne troops were issued with the maroon berets to make the distinguish that you was an airborne soldier. And you got a few English money extra pay. We got what they call a shilling a day, which is equal now to the 10 pence in England, in English money. And the parachutists got 2 shilling a day. And I think it was early 1943, we'd done exercise after exercise in these huge troop-carrying gliders. And I think it was about probably April, we came under orders for going overseas, which we knew sooner or later we would have to go for what a were would be kept secret till the last minute. Now, it was probably about the 3rd week in May of June 1943, we went from the camp we were stationed on to Liverpool, and there we picked a boat up. The next day we joined a convoy, sailed to Scotland, and then we was told then we was bound for North Africa. I must say this and all, that when we set sailing, the North Africa campaign had finished, so we didn't take no active action at all in North Africa. I think maybe 8 or 9 days sailing, we arrived at the port of Oran in Algiers late at the night, and American trucks then took us to the hills outside of Oran, and we was told to count down for the night, and then it was a matter of doing a lot of exercises in North Africa, but mostly in the American, I don't know I'm saying it's when it's pronounced Waco or Waco. No, they only hold 14 men, so instead of having a platoon in one glider, each platoon had 2 gliders. And we did quite a lot of exercises in as I say, in North Africa. And by then, after about 2 months, we'd got acclimatised to the... You see, we had... we started off taking shirt and vest off for about 20 minutes in the hot sun, and maybe about 9 o'clock in the morning, after we'd had a breakfast meal. And after maybe 2 months, we were sunburnt, and there was nobody getting sunstrokes. The only thing we was getting was some got malaria, some got sandfly fever, which is almost like malaria, only it doesn't repeat itself once you've got over it. And then I think it was about the end of June, they started then explaining on maps what our invasion was. But we knew exactly what we was bound to do, what we had to do when landing in this wherever we was going. And it was only the night before they told us we was going on the airborne invasion of Sicily. We would be taking off from, first of all, I will go back to my tale. We was then, one of the big exercise we did, we was flown from Algeria over the Atlas Mountains and landed in airstrips in Tunisia. And one story I must tell you about this, our battalion was almost landed, all the gliders were down, all the Waco, and there was another battalion, the 2nd Battalion South Staffordshire Regiment. They was landing about 3 miles farther on than us, and we got off the airfield, just sat down waiting of everybody landing, and I looked up and I saw one of the worst accidents I've ever seen in a glider. I looked up, and as I looked up, the tail of the glider fell off, and the men came falling out just as if they were parachutists with it, but there's no parachutes, so... But I didn't see them hit the ground, so that was a terrible, terrible accident as I saw with my own eyes. And we did all this for exercises, and then the nearest place in this part of Tunis, I can recall, was a place called Sousse, and another place was... the holy city of Kairouan. We was in that area, and I think it was probably the 7th of July that year. That was 43. They was then told we was going on the airborne invasion of Sicily, and we would be the forerunners of the airborne. The code name was Husky, which was the seaborne and airborne invasion of Sicily. And on the night of the 9th, we were then down to the landing strips, and we met the crew of the tug planes, which was American pilots and crew, and I think it was about 5:30 that evening, we set off, we took off, and we hadn't been flying so long. Now the idea was we was flying almost in a straight line to Malta, and then when we got to Malta, the convoy of gliders would swing east, and I think it was only about half an hour's flight then to maybe an hour to the landing zones on Sicily. But we hadn't been flying so long before a bit of a storm blew up, so we had the most terrible flight it were possible to have. How the glider pilots managed to keep control of the gliders, I don't know. Now, the first glider pilot, but there's 2 glider pilots. Now, the first one, the main one, his responsibilities for getting you off the floor and landing. And the second pilot can take over, so they could take it turns in steering us. And they had a terrible time keeping us on course with the wind. And when we got within distance of Sicily itself, which was about 10 o'clock in the evening, so we'd done about a 3.5 to 4 hour flight, and we got word then from the glider pilot. We put our equipment and ready to land, and I think it was about 10 minutes after, the word went round suddenly, take your equipment off, we're not going to land on Sicily, we're going to crash in the sea, which was a dreadful thought of us coming in, into the Mediterranean and probably sinking immediately. And so the glider pilot managed to get us down on the sea safely, but it was a terrific crash when we hit the ocean, and the perspex of the cockpit broke with the waves, and by then we was up to here in water, and I was nearest the door, and they were shouting to me, get that door open quick. But I think, I didn't know this, but until years and years after, the pressure has to be equal on, like a car going in a river, and the door wouldn't open. So the Waco gliders are tubular, maybe aluminium, I don't know what, and they were covered by what they call doped canvas. And the man in front of me felt in the water, got his rifle, smashed a hole in the canvas. The water shot in again and knocked us all over. And then the man that's got us out was the first out, and unfortunately he must have been washed away. We never saw him again. Now, as quick as we could, we all got out and got on the wings. The glider was floating, and so the officer counted us up. The man that had been washed away, we'd lost him, no doubt he was washed away and drowned. And he counts us up. The glider pilot has got us down. We don't know whether he was fast in the cockpit, or was drowned, or he was killed in the crash. That's something we'd never know. So they counted us up, and so with only one, out of 14 men, there was only one that was missing then. So, which we took our boots off to politeness, and I asked our officer, Lieutenant Roll, I said, how far do you think we're off the coast of Sicily? He said, we're about 3 miles out at sea. So he said, so what I want you is to watch each other. And we were sat on the wings, but the glider was actually floating. And but whatever, I don't know the explanation of a heavy swell, but it's like a big wave. And within minutes, these big waves were hitting us and washing us away, unless you hold them tight. So we decided after about an hour that probably the best thing was let the wave wash you away and swim back, because holding the glider tight was sapping your strength and energy. But we had 5 men on that glider as couldn't swim, so you can imagine the terror they must have been going through. They still clung to the glider, and during the night, first one was washed away. When we got back, there was one missing, and in all, we lost 5 men washed away. So then, probably early hours of the morning, we could hear the battle going on Sicily itself, and the aircraft flying over us. They were being shot at with anti-aircraft guns, and maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, parts of the glider started breaking away. So it was just a matter of how long we could survive in the water. Now, one question I've been asked, and I could never answer it, was it cold or warm in the water? Now, I could never remember whether it was warm or cold. probably at that time of the year, July the 9th, it was quite warm. So it got about 4 o'clock then, and we'd had, as I said, we'd lost 5 men washed away, and by then we was all feeling quite low in morale then, as were we going to drown. That was probably on most of our minds. And we had 3 men washed away, but we didn't know it till weeks after. They was picked up by a boat, because by then the invasion by sea was anchored maybe half a mile away, and they was being took ashore. And I think it was maybe between 5 and 6 in the morning. Well, an invasion barge what had took some of our soldiers ashore, spotted us, came to us and rescued us. And by then we was in a weary state. We'd been in the water 7.5 to 8 hours then. And we were took to the mothership, got on this mothership, wrapped in blankets and took down to the sick bay, because we was all being sick with the salt water. And so the next morning, well, probably about 9 o'clock, I woke up and I could hear the battle going on Sicily, and the shelling from the Germans, shelling the beaches, and anti-aircraft shooting at aircraft going over. And so it was a matter then of what's going to happen to us, because all we had on was our KD shorts and underpants. So that's it. Hours went by, and it was about 5 o'clock. Then the skipper told us then, he said, now, you're going to be took back. The convoys of these boats, these ships what have landed all the crew, the convoys going back to various ports, and the convoy you were going back with in this boat is going back, you'll be took to Malta as survivors then. And of course, there was only a few was left by then, and we had one fellow who had his legs badly cut, so he was took to the hospital in Malta. We landed at Valletta and took to an army camp in Malta, awaiting instructions. And we was in Malta for about 5 days. We was given fresh uniforms, etc. And we was then to a camp, as I say, in Malta, and we was there for a week, and then we joined another convoy, and it took us back to Philippeville in North Africa, and Philippeville back to the olive grove where we was camped under, for back to join the battalion, what was left of it. But it was only then, as I realised that besides our glider, there was quite a lot of, besides us, some gliders had crashed in the sea, and they were never heard of again. They probably sunk and were all drowned. And I think we lost out of about 600 to 700 soldiers as took part in the airborne invasion of Sicily. I think there was about 125 men drowned. So that was a bad start to our overseas service. So actually, when you talk about was I on the invasion of Sicily, I wasn't, because we never got there. And so then it were back to training with a very depleted battalion. And we got no reinforcement, so we was a lot less. We was 150 men of the battalion out of about 600. And then we did more exercises, etc. And then September became the month of September, and the news came to us that the Germans, the Italian government, had swapped round, and Italy was now one of our allies. So I'm not sure of the dates, but it'd be probably late September. We were transported by trucks to the port of Bizerta. We slept outside on the hills of Bizerta, and the next morning we went aboard the battleship Dido to be transported on the invasion of Italy. And we anchored outside the port of Taranto. We should have gone straight into Taranto harbour, but the first battleship with a battalion of parachute troops on, called the Abdul, went in. That must have been the first battleship to get there, and they hit what they believed to be a mine, and it blew a hole in the bottom of the ship, turned over, and most of the parachutists were drowned. And so I think that evening we landed in the port of Taranto, and we marched through the city of Taranto on the outskirts. Taranto was more or less a ghost town, and from there we then took part in. We were such a small battalion by then, and with no anti-tank guns, with no artillery. We were just a make-believe infantry unit, and our job then was the Germans was retreating, but we didn't know at the time, of course. The first big stand they made was Naples, and is on the west coast. Foggia was on the and almost the line. Now, when you got you had to imagine a line, Tripoli, Naples and Foggia, and then there was the plains of Foggia, and then the big river, and then the mountainous regions of Italy start there. So we did patrols there. As the Germans moved, say, from town A, say 10 miles, then we take the place over. We were there, because if they'd have stuck us with a fighting battalion, we'd have been in a real mess. Now, we went up the coast from, I'm not sure in which order, but we went to Brindisi, the big port, and then Bari. I'm not sure whether Bari or Brindisi, which order they come in. And we got to Foggia, and dug slit trenches on the Foggia plains, and we were there about a week when an infantry battalion relieved us, and we marched back over a couple of weeks back to Taranto, doing guards and etc., and possibly I think we was in Italy about 3 months, and so we arrived in Taranto. We were in Taranto in the village there for about 2 weeks, and then we were transported by small boats back to North Africa, back to Philippeville, to a transit camp. And we didn't know these things at the time, but this was probably mid-November when we got there, in this Philippeville. And we was then transported back to the UK in a convoy, and we arrived at the port of Liverpool, I should say, about the second week in December. But during the voyage, things didn't go very smooth like they should have done. Now, a convoy, if you read about convoys at sea, they zigzagged so that submarines couldn't get a steady bead on them to try and sink them. It was to put them off the side. Now, we'd passed Gibraltar, and I think it was about midday, we heard this hooters going, woo, woo, and I thought, we're either being attacked by a submarine or being attacked from the air. And what it was, the steering of a boat called the Duchess of Bedford, and it was known to the sailors as the Drunken Duchess because it was it was a very bad ship to sail in. And our skipper told us after that the steering of the Duchess of Bedford, they had no control over it. So we actually, you could imagine a huge ship with thousands of troops on, hitting another ship. We're running the other ship and almost keeled over. And our ship wasn't badly damaged, but the other one we hit had to go back to Malta. It limped back to Malta for repairs. So we arrived back in England one very frosty and foggy night in November, and after 24 hours we disengaged from the boat, and we were took to a camp in Lincolnshire by train called Woodall Spa. And it is part of the county of Lincolnshire, and Lincolnshire is a very flat county, and there was a lot of aerodromes there. But the 1st Airborne Division, what was left of it, was the 1st Air Landing Brigade, I should have said, which was only glider-borne troops, was billeted in the different villages in Lincolnshire. And we knew then we'd been brought back so we could take part in the whenever D-Day was. So it was back to glider training, plenty of exercises, and glider flights for 4 hours we used to go on exercises. And we knew that by then 1944 had arrived. And probably we were there 2 or 3 months when the weather was picking up by then, and we knew D-Day wouldn't be far away. But we woke up one morning to hear the news that D-Day had arrived, and the 1st Airborne Division, which was up to full strength then, had not took no part in it. So on D-Day +2, we were took to aerodromes, parachutists to the aerodrome, glider-borne troops to another, where the gliders were, to whatever was in front of us then. And I think we was briefed for about a dozen operations, and for one reason or another, one for instance, the place we should have landed in France, they'd already been overrun, so the operation was cancelled. Now, the code word for it being, you was allowed to go to bed in your billets, and during the early hours of the morning, somebody from the guardroom would come in your billet and shout, Fabian. And Fabian was the code word for the operation you're involved in is cancelled. And this this went on for weeks and weeks, till we were beginning to wonder then whether they would ever take any part in the invasion of Europe. Now, before we actually went, we was briefed for this operation called Market Garden. The market was the airborne part of us, and the garden was the relieving troops to come. Now, airborne troops, if they're not relieved within 48 hours, you're in trouble. We only carry probably enough ammunition to last us 48 hours. So we did, as history will tell you, the 17th of September, we were took down to the glider dome, and I think it was about 9:30, and we were briefed. We knew what our job was. The main job was to land near the town of Arnhem in Holland, and the main job was to capture bridges. Now, somewhere before us, there was 2 American Airborne Division. They knew what their jobs was, capture their bridges. So on the 17th, probably about 9 o'clock, we took off, and you could imagine the huge convoy of gliders. It was about 15 miles long and probably a mile wide, and we was escorted by hundreds of fighter planes. They were buzzing round us like angry. Now, did we get fired on? We got not probably a few miles to the before the Dutch coast, and an anti-aircraft boat in the channel fired on the convoy, and we could see the puff of this when it fired, and 2 fighter planes shot it up and probably sunk it. So we crossed the Dutch coast, which had been flooded, to stop seaborne invasions, and this is when this infamous Battle of Arnhem began. One thing was against this battle ever succeeding. Now, the idea of any airborne soldiers by glider or parachute is to land as near the object as possible. And now they had showed us secret plans that the Germans knew there was 3 airborne invasions in England. There was in parts of Holland and Belgium, and so what you may ask, well, why didn't you land near the bridge? Well, the north end of the bridge was a built-up area with houses and factories, and the southern end of the bridge, the polder, wasn't satisfactory for glider landings. So we landed on the east. Now, any airborne soldier knows that the idea of airborne soldier is to land as near the object you want to capture as near as you can, like they did at Normandy, when the gliders crashed right near the bridge. And they also said, secret reports had come in that the Germans knew there was 3 airborne division, so what would they be used for? So they guessed quite a lot of bridges would be attacked. And so we landed 7 miles on this, like a big heath, or the heath of Arnhem, the Genkel heath, and so all elements of surprise had gone by then, and so we all was wondering why weren't we landing nearby. But that's the reason. Now, one of the other reasons, now once a tug plane tells his glider pilot, you're over your landing zone, cast off now, they just can't turn around. They had to fly well away from us, and they'd be flying probably over an airfield in Holland called Deelen, which was a fighter aerodrome. So everything was against us landing near the object. So now we made 1 o'clock just after midday. We made a perfect landing, and the idea then is to land and get out as quick as you can down the ramp and form a circle, so that if you're fired on, if you're attacked when you landed, would have somebody be able to fire on backward on the enemy. And the gliders were coming in right, left and centre, and the big idea was that the 1st Air Landing Brigade would form a huge circle around the heath, so that the parachute troops would be covered half an hour after we'd landed. And so it was a matter of just waiting and waiting. Now, the tale I told you about this glider tail falling off in North Africa, there was another similar incident. The sooner you got down, and the more space you had for the gliders to land. Now, I looked up and saw there was a forest in front of us and a forest at this side, quite a way off us. And the glider I saw passing over our head, it got quite low then, and the glider pilot must have realised he was going to crash in the forest, and if he veered to the right, his wing would catch some of the trees and probably drop down. And instead, it hit the trees and it slowly went over, and they landed on top of the trees. And Lieutenant Rose said to me, "Come with me and we'll see what we can do." And he said, but you cover, I was a light machine gun, a brain gun. That brain gun was a light machine gun. And he said, you keep me covered while I see if I can get the door open. And unfortunately, he said to me that they're all dead inside. They've all been killed in the crash. And while we was waiting for the parachute, we could hear machine guns and artillery going off. And I think probably got to 5 o'clock in the evening. Now, B companies I served with, our job then was to go to the nearest village was called Wilf, the next village was called Oldham, and then Recollections. And the idea was to get on the outskirts of Recollections to try and stop any German troop movements coming from the direction of Apollon of Wageningen. So we got through Recollections, we met very little opposition. We shot two or three trucks up, but they didn't know just where they were going. They didn't know where we'd landed properly. So we shot 3 German troops with German soldiers up, and we dug in on the banks of the Rhine, the Nedder Rhine. I dug a slit trench with my number 2. There was a ferry there, and my job was to keep my machine gun trained on the ferry. It was on the other side, and make sure it didn't come over, or if it did come over, to keep it covered. And when it did come over, I shouted to my officer, that ferry's coming over. And he said, well, don't fire on it till we see what happens. And there were, I think, a dozen German soldiers, but they wasn't German nationals, they was Ukrainians, would have been forced in the German army, and they decided to get the ferry and give themselves up. And so far, the battle for us hadn't really started. And then it did start during the night. We were shelled by German opposition in the vicinity of Wageningen. And sometime during the night, a force of Germans got between us and our way back to the battalion, back to the division, which was around Oosterbeek. And so we got word from divisional headquarters. We had to try and get back to rejoin the airborne division, which was round most of it was round Oosterbeek. And as you know, the parachute troops has got near the bridge. They had a terrible fight because there was a strong party of Germans, and we had been told there was only third-rate troops there, and no tanks, and it was exactly the opposite. There were some first-rate troops there, and so we did manage to get back to Oosterbeek, and they were shelling and mortaring a machine gun and attacking us quite a lot all the time. And so we was like hemmed in then by German troops. And as you know, they captured the southern end, the northern end of the bridge, and the Germans held it, and when the bridge was never captured. Now, if this battle had succeeded, the war, all German troops in northern Holland would be cut off, and you cross the bridge, and it's only about 20 miles into the German border, and you're then in the Ruhr Valley. And if you could capture the industrial Ruhr Valley, then the war could have been over for Christmas. But the Germans knew then what was going on, and the American airborne force troops had more or less captured all their objectives, but they had a terrible, terrible battle for the battle between where they landed and to capture the bridge at Nijmegen. Now, if that bridge had been blown up, then we'd have been in worse trouble than ever. And it was a matter of 2 or 3 days then of beating infantry attacks off, and when we beat them off at round Oosterbeek, then they were shelling and mortared us till it was hell on earth. Now, as I say, after 48 hours, we expected the attacking British forces would have relieved us by then. So we were short of food, short of ammunition, and the Germans had us end in, and it was a matter of being shelled and mortared for days and days. And every morning we kept thinking the British Army would be here, but they had a terrible... So they decided after 10 days of terrible fighting, shelling, and in that time we'd lost a lot of men. The platoon I was in, half of them would have been killed or taken prisoner, wounded, and we was in a sorry state. We were short of food, short of ammunition. You could only fire when you knew you could hit a target. So this battle went on, and as I say, in my thoughts, I thought, well, we'll never get away. We'll either be killed or took prisoner. And I don't think we eat for days and days, because we only took enough food to last us 48 hours. And by then we'd been fighting for 9 terrible days. And the Germans, as I say, they kept attacking us and killing us. Well, a lot were killed, and then we were attacked by tanks, and the only anti-tank weapon was an instrument called the Piat, and it was only a good weapon up to about 100 yards. So a tank had to be quite near you before you could fire this bomb. And as I say, we was in a sorry state, and what was going to happen to us? We thought, as I said, would we all get killed? And then I put the battle in a small space of time, when it was actually one of the worst battles what had happened probably since D-Day. Right, now I have not spoke too much about the actual fighting at Arnhem, but believe me, it was a terrible, terrible battle. So I'll try and explain what it's like to be attacked by tanks and infantry. Well, first of all, your platoon was placed in a position on the edge of the forest, probably, or wherever it was, and to try and stop any attacks which we knew was coming from the direction of Arnhem by probably 200 or 300 infantrymen and tanks. So in America, I believe they call it a foxhole. Now in England, we call it a slit trench. Now, if you want me to describe what a slit trench is, if you've ever been to a cemetery and seen before the coffins lowered into the grave, if you've seen a pit like that, maybe 4 foot deep and about 2 foot wide, so that most of your body is below the surface of the ground, then you've got the idea of what a slit trench is. Now, probably you wouldn't see anybody else, because they'd be dug in the same position all around your platoon, all maybe 200 or 300 yards away, separated. And when you must probably think, well, when would you know the next attack was coming? Well, then the German artillery and mortars would be shelling you probably for a good hour, and you'd think sooner or later one of these is going to hit me. And I'll quote later on about an experience how near I was to being killed. And so as soon as they started shelling and mortaring, you knew the German infantry was coming to attack you. So you got your machine gun, made sure you had magazines ready, and you got one in what we call in the breech, ready to fire, and then they'd suddenly start running towards you. And the idea then was, well, it's kill or be killed. You was continually firing at the German infantry till they got the order to pull back. So then the artillery would start again, and the old system was kill or be killed, beat the attacks off, and but sooner or later positions would get overrun, and what hadn't been killed would be either wounded or troop prisoner. And now, what would it do? I've been asked this many times, what's a noises before the battle started? One of the worst noises I think you can hear is the wheels of a tank, the squeaking of the tracks. You know that the tank, and we had only very light weapons to stop any tanks, and it was terrible to think that a tank would suddenly appear and fire on you. But during these mortar and artillery shells was quite a few people killed, stood in the slits. When I said they were the slit trenches like a grave, in a lot of times it was a grave. Now, people said, did you ever get wounded? Well, I don't know what you'd call this. It was late on in one battle, and the shells were dropping all of them, and I thought, one of these shells is going to hit me and kill me. And then there was such a terrific bang, and I can still remember hearing the explosions, and I thought, my eardrums have gone. And the next shell, what landed near me, I can vividly remember, it just felt as if somebody was squeezing my lungs, squeezing all the air, and I believe that's the blast from the artillery. And I had I don't know they actually did. I just felt that somebody was lifting me up gently and then dropping me down. And the blast had knocked me unconscious. And I lay in the bottom of this slit trench for, I don't know how long I was unconscious. And when I came round, I was face down, and the battle sounds had died away then. And the man and another soldier, what was about 100 yards away from me, I shouted to him when I got me come from unconsciousness, and he couldn't answer me. And actually, I did go over to see him, and he was lay unconscious, and after I shook him and woke him up, and he was just like me. He'd been hit with a blast, and it had knocked him unconscious. Little less things like... Now, one time, after they'd done this shelling and bombing for maybe 3 or 4 hours, Lieutenant Royal, who was my platoon officer, said, right, Oldham, get your LMG. I was a light machine gunner, or a brain gun as it was named. I'm taking 8 men on a fighting patrol to see where the Germans are. And a fellow called Foster, Private Foster, he said, excuse me, sir. He said, well, I'm like everybody else. We're just here like sitting ducks, waiting and waiting to be killed. Can I go out on this patrol and leave Oldham here? And he said, right, Oldham, you stop where you are. And the 8 men went on the patrol and an officer, and when they come back, there were 7 men and an officer. And I said, where's Private Foster? He said he's got killed. Now, if I'd have gone on the patrol, I wouldn't be telling this tale. So, is it fate or luck? I don't know what it is. But, another time, when they'd shelled and bombed, you were glad to get out of your tents for a bit of relaxation. And I was talking to a man, and he was only... Now, the gentleman what's filming me now, he was as near to me as I am to him. And I heard this slight and he dropped down dead at my feet. So I knew this bullet had hit him in the head, at the faces, centre of his forehead, and I knew that bullet had gone past me as close as it were possible to do before it hit him. So another incident like that, we'd had nothing to eat for 3 or 4 days, and we were dug in near this cottage on the edge of the woods, and I could see there was tomatoes growing outside. And I shouted, I'll go over there and get some of these tomatoes. No, he said, you mustn't go. You'll probably get somebody seeing you. I said, well, I'm going to take that. And I went up, and I can visualise myself now. These tomatoes were on a level with the window, and I put my hand up to get one. and all the windows crashed out. They'd seen me, they'd put a Bristol machine gun at me, and as near to damage as to swearing, they'd have killed me. So you have to have that bit, as I say, I don't need to call it luck or fate, but you think the next time you won't be so lucky. And but this went on and on and on, but each time, each attack, they were pushing us closer and closer till we was in what the Germans called the Devil's Cauldron, a space probably, it was at the most a mile long and probably quarter to half a mile wide, and we were surrounded by, so I think the last 2 days the man in charge of the German troops decided, why should I lose a lot of men attacking them when I can kill them with just keep shelling? And that was another terrible time. Well, I have told you about the attacks the German put on us. Now, that was repeated many, many times for days on end. And then along come, I think it was this, we'd landed on the Sunday, I think it was either the Sunday night week after, or the Monday. And it probably was approaching dusk. And they'd just stopped shelling and bombing and attacking. And Lieutenant Royal come to me and he said, Oldham, he said, the top brass has decided that this is a lost cause. This is and we're losing a lot of men. So what's left of the 1st Airborne Division, we're doing our best to get you on the southern banks of the Rhine, the Nedder Rhine, and then we'll take it from there. He said, because there's no way can we win this battle. In fact, we're losing it hand over fist now. So he said, what I want you to do, in another hour, I'll come for you. And anybody what's been to Arnhem, and in the region of Oosterbeek, there was the old church. And it's still pockmarked with shell splinters, what knocked pieces out of it. And it's been left as a memorial. It's still a practising church. And he took me just near there, and he said, now, the people coming through the forest, they'll have cloths round the shoes, but the army boots, to deaden any sound. He says, and it's raining hard now, so it's all in the favour of noise. So he said, so what I want you to do, he said, they'll follow these white tapes through the forest, and then they'll come to the clearings, and between you and the river is the fields. He said, I want you to stand there, and when the first troops come through, your job will be to stop them. They'll be led by an officer probably. And you'll stop them, just say quietly, halt, and then you'll show them exactly which direction they've got to go in to get to the boats. And the other thing is, somewhere in the Nijmegen region, there's 2 artillery shells will be firing tracer shells. So, as you know, tracer bullets light up, glow, and the tracer, they'll be probably 200 to 300 yards wide, forming a lane. I'm doing it with my hands, which you know you can. And he said, and they'll be fired simultaneously, so they'll be like a red streak, a twin red streak, and provided they're in that corridor, they're heading for the right place. So you must tell them all these things. He said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but he said, and you stay here till I give you permission to move. He said, so you'll probably be one of the last to get away from here, if you can get away. And then, I should say about an hour, maybe an hour and a half before dawn, he came and he said, now then, how long is it since you saw any troops going down to the river? I said, at least half an hour. So he shook my hands and he said, you've got my permission to go down to the river, and there'll be boats there taking you on the others. So walking down over the fields to the river, there were shells and mortar bombs still dropping in the night. Now, when I got to the river, I thought there'd be somebody waiting for me saying, where have you been, you know? All the others had gone. When I got to the Rhine, there was a big sandbank, and to my utter dismay, there must have been 300 or 400 men waiting to be transported across, because some of the boats had been sunk. Some had been sunk and killed and with shells and mortar. They were shelling on they could hear the boats coming across, but we lived in hope that the Germans thought there'd be reinforcements coming our way. They didn't know we was pulling out. And so I thought in an hour it's going to be light, so that's it then. We'll either be killed or took prisoner again. Many times I'd thought this. Now, the Corporal Clark, as I knew, for some reason or other, none of us ever knew, he said there's only one boat left, so we've no chance of getting over the other side to safety. What about us walking down with the flow of the river to see if we can find something? Now, the chances of us finding anything to get us over, I would say, was nil. But we'd walked about a quarter of a mile and we was amongst the German lines, then no talking, and there was a boat with 4 oars in. And there was an officer with us, about 12 of us, and I said I could row a little bit, which I couldn't do, and 4 of us rowed over, and when we got to the other bank we'd been washed, so we had to more or less wade part up to the knees in probably the mud and water, back to where these shells were going, and when we got to where we knew the boats had been taken, had been ferrying troops across, they couldn't take any more. So we was, how lucky we was to get to the other bank. Now, there was a Canadian soldier dug in this trench, telling you where to go there, like I was doing at this side, and he said, "Come on, lads, you're safe now." And them were probably the nicest words I've heard, probably, maybe ever. Now, the Canadian engineers were, they was in a place where there had been, I think it was a brickworks, there was little trucks there, and he said, just sit down, and they brought us a cup of tea, which was as nice as taste as I've ever had in my life. I had drunk nothing, only water for all that time. And so he said, when we can, there'll be an army truck taking you back to Nijmegen. And by then it was light, of course. And when we'd gone about 5 minutes, he stopped. He said, "Just have a look." And up the dyke, obviously, the Germans had sent a big patrol of about, I should have had 20 men, and they'd been spotted, and they came up the dyke in military order, all in a straight line, and they were all laid down as if they were all asleep. They were all dead there. And when we got back to Nijmegen, I'm not so certain whether it was a school or some sort of a building we went to, and there they took your name, rank and number and told you to go in this building and just get down and wait instructions. Now, while I was in this building, me and this corporal, hey up, stand up, he said, stand up. He said, "General Urquhart's coming along." And as he came along, he was speaking to quite a few. And when he got to me and Corporal Clark, he said, "It's very pleasing to see you've got across all right." He said, "Did you like to ask me anything or get you anything?" And Corporal Clark said, "Well, we've not had a wash or a shave for at least a week. Is there any chance of getting us any shaving?" Well, he said, "In an hour, you'll be getting a hot meal, and then when you've all eaten, I'll be giving you what's going on. So just don't start guessing what you're going to do, what's not going to do." Now, when we did go in this hall, he said, "Well, first of all, I'm glad to see some of you what have got away, including my own self." He said, "And what's going to happen to you? You'll be in Nijmegen for about 2 days and 2 nights, and then you'll get further instructions what's happening to you." So don't start guessing or nothing like that. All will be revealed. And after 2 days, now this, I think it was either maybe the second night, the Germans started to bomb the bridge at Nijmegen, because it's a very important bridge, and it didn't happen. So the bridge was still, to this day, it's still in the same condition. And we were to I may be pronounced, I think it was a place called Louvain in Belgium, what was left of the 1st Airborne Division. And there we were kitted out with clean clothes. And after 2 days, we were then took to an aerodrome, and it was a supply aerodrome for American forces. And as a Dakota come in, you were all sat on the floor. As the plane come in, the American crew went and had what they had to do, and British supply weapons were taking the ammunition and whatever was in the plane. And then when the crew come back, they said, right, 25 of you, get on, just sit on the floor and we're flying you back to the UK. And we had an uneventful flight back. Of course, we was flying over friendly territory then. And we landed at an aerodrome in Lincoln, and we took back to billets. And when they come to count us up, I think our company was about 125, maybe 130 men, and there was only 23 of us got back to the UK. They wasn't all killed, they was prisoners till the war was over. And so as far as my tale's concerned, that was the last fighting we saw, because it takes months to get new recruits, probably lads would have been in the army for maybe 6 months, to get trained as fighting soldiers and get trained to flying in gliders, etc. And now where would it be? Maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks before we didn't know the war was coming to an end, we went on a big exercise, flew for 4 hours, landed on the aerodrome, then went on a 25-mile route march in the dark. And early hours at morning, all the column was halted, sit down, and now we all wondered what was going on. Now, a dispatch lad I spoke to stopped near me, and he said, well, what's happened? All the German forces in Italy have surrendered unconditionally, so it won't be long before it happens all over. And then I think it was a day or two after, we went back to the barracks in Suffolk in southern England, and the war had finished then. They'd signed the unconditional surrender. And but the question was, would the German forces in occupied countries, would they give up? They didn't know whether they'd carry on fighting or not, but I think the German people were that militarised and that disciplined. If somebody said no, that was it. If it said yes, that was it. They accepted what was... So we got ready to do an invasion, glider-borne invasion of Norway. When I say we got ready, I'm talking of gliders what held anti-tank guns and jeeps and things like that. We just marched into the glider and sat in this seat you'd always sat on. So we went to this aerodrome. There were Lancaster bombers there, and they said, we're flying you out in Lancaster bombers to Norway to round German troops up and disarm them, etc. We don't think there'll be any fighting, but you've got to be prepared. And this is another tragic tale, part of this can happen, a tragic, is it luck or fate? When we got to Norway, the weather was very, very either foggy or misty, so the convoy of planes, they got the orders to turn back and fly to England, back to the UK, and unfortunately, for some reason or other, whether they didn't get the message or got lost, there were 3 Lancaster bombers with 25 men in each. Some of them had fought in Africa, Burma, all over Europe. The war in Europe was finished, and 3 of them crashed in the mountains and were all killed. So how How do you account for that? How can it happen? And it did happen. Now, the next day we flew to Norway. We landed on what had been a German aerodrome. And after about 3 hours, the Germans themselves drove us in trucks to the railway station, and they drove us into Oslo. And so you can imagine the reception we got. And so we was in Norway disarming German troops and rounding German troops up and things like that. The Norwegian government wanted them out of Norway as quickly as possible. So I'm not sure whether it was 3 or 4 months, we'd done our job in Norway, so we then sailed back to England, got a month's leave, and then we were sent as army occupation in Germany. And of course the curfews and everything were on. There were strict observations had to be obeyed. I think 8 o'clock at night in Germany, they wasn't allowed to even walk the streets because of the curfew. And just before we went to Norway, I was made a Lance Corporal, and by the time, 2 months before the war, I was a sergeant of the platoon I'd served in. And then my demobilisation came up, and I was back to England, took to a building where I was issued with civilian clothes, and arrived home to the girl as I loved and had married, in the same town I live now, and that was the end of my military service. But maybe you think, well, you've not explained a lot about the battles, but if I told you one battle, it was a repeat of the same. Attacked by the German infantry, but somewhere in the Nijmegen area, our artillery was shelling them and killing them as they were attacking us. So they had to retreat, and many times they overrun the positions that our troops were in, and either killed people where they were or took them prisoners. And
did you ever see that happening? The Germans overrunning a British position?
Oh yes, I saw 1 or 2 places where they overrun. And
what do you remember witnessing?
Well, there was like where I could see them, and when they got too near and the fighting, they knew there was nothing they could do to stop the Germans. Then they probably raised their arms up, and but I can't say, but I know it did. I can't say as the Germans did take them all prisoners, because in some cases they were probably the battle what was in the excitement. A bloke lifted his arms up and they shot him dead where he was. And I know it's against all Geneva Convention, but there again, it's in war. These laws are broken, and there was people took prisoners. Now there was a little instance. An officer told me when he was took prisoner, and when they stopped, there was probably a dozen airborne soldiers in this truck, and when they stopped to let them urinate on the side of the woods, he escaped, and he didn't know this man until when the war was over. And in the anger of the moment, the men what hadn't got out of the truck, they shot them all dead, so they murdered them. It was pure murder. There was that anger at some escaping, and so once again, when we got back, by the time, as I said, by the time we got reinforcements and they were trained up to fighting, the war had come to an end. So I considered myself extremely lucky that I'd survived. Like I say, in the sea at Sicily, we had, I think it was 5 to 7 men drowned. But I was a decent swimmer. So when I told you the tale about me, let the waves wash you away so you don't lose all your strength, being a non-swimmer, it just didn't happen. They was that terrified. So they must have died. They obviously died drowning, but they must have died of terrified death. You know, and it's well, I give quite a lot of talks on this. I'm not very good at it, I know, but I have done. And but I always tell school children today, or I've spoken to adult audiences about it. I don't consider myself a military historian. I'm just an ordinary working man and telling you what happened to an ordinary soldier. That war is nothing like what the war films are made of, where only the baddies get killed and the goodies survive. Wars is the most terrible thing what one nation can inflict on another, and at the end of this war, at any particular war, one side's victorious, but both sides have lost. They've lost many thousands of the youth of this country, young lads of 17, 18, what have all their life in front of them. They've lost their life. They're buried in war cemeteries all over the world, and from our war up to the present war, the wars come to you. In the First World War, you had to go to the wars. So, but now, I shudder to think what could happen with if we ever had another modern warfare. If, say, war broke out between us and China, us and Russia, anything like that. I shudder to think what could happen to any mainland with the weapons they have at their disposal. You know, in Japan, was it 45,000 killed with one bomb, the atom bomb, and people dying of radiation burns for years after? And so what would our world be like in a modern war? Maybe the thoughts of each country having terrible weapons is enough to stop a war. And I'd hope that one time, I'd like to end this story with, well, I'd hope that one time, maybe not, it won't happen in my time, not in your time listening to me talking, but in years to come, I'd like to think that somewhere in this country, or any country in the world, they'd wake up to the wonderful news that they'd had secret meetings somewhere of all the world's leaders, and they'd all agreed that war should be a thing of the past. The billions and billions of pounds what are spent on destroying the world, they'd be used to make this world a peaceful world where neighbour could live with neighbour. Nobody, man, woman or child, would be hungry. No man, woman or child would be clean running water. Well, maybe I'm talking about an ideal world, and I'm afraid there's a possibility, a good one, that could never happen. And I'm talking about probably 100 years from now. And so maybe I've not been very good at explaining, but I hope that you could learn something from what I've talked about. Believe me, war is the most dreadful thing that can happen between nations. And I do hope I've tried to explain some things to you, my own little story, my own battle. And did you ever go back to Arnhem? Because there's a big pilgrimage goes on every year. Now, for 45 years I never went back. For one thing, I never wanted to go back to Holland and the Arnhem used to be areas. Not for what we'd done, for what we'd not done. All we've brought to that part of Holland was death, destruction, starvation, hunger. How could we go back? These people would never forgive us for what we'd not done. And after 45 years, I made myself a member of what was known as the Arnhem 1944 Veterans Club. And each September for 5 days, there's a huge ceremony that go on in Arnhem. And I decided to go back just once. And to my very, very pleasant surprise, I didn't realise as a beaten country, a country we'd ruined, a part of a country, would welcome us with such open arms. And the people has took me in, and Mr. and Mrs. Haglin of Renkum, and this, which I still go to this day. Unfortunately, this year, I was too ill and couldn't go, and it was a terrible, terrible disappointment not to go for the 75th anniversary. And as I said, I've reached the age of 99. Now, God willing, and he'll dictate to me whether I can go or not. I'd like to go back next year. There's very few Arnhem veterans left. Very few World War II veterans left. In America and England, any country what was involved in the war, was there's very few veterans left. And sometimes when I come back from Arnhem, after, I think it was before we went on leave, a few of us had to be to see what I didn't know. An army doctor, and he was a psychiatrist, but I'd never heard the words. I didn't know what one was. And he was asking you questions. Did you wake up screaming? Now, you was back in the UK. Did you wet the bed and things like this? And now, they know all about things like this. You see, they realise through this Afghan business and Iraq that people are affected badly with it. In the First World War, there were people badly affected by a shell, and it was known as shell shock. And they refused to go over the top, and they was executed for being cowards. And they wasn't cowards at all, they were just ill, stricken down by this terrible shell shock syndrome. And so, as I say, I do hope you've learnt a little bit, because I have always believed that history has a nasty habit of repeating itself. And there's one quote about it. If Hitler had studied the Russian front, what happened to Napoleon could happen to him. And because the Germans, I'm led to believe that the forward Germans, when they got as far as they could actually see the roofs of Moscow in the distance. And then comes the weather and the war, the terrible winters, and the Germans lost thousands of men frozen to death. And that was the beginning of the end. And what people say, do you think if America hadn't to come in, you could have won the war? Well, my answer is, I don't think we could. When you think of all the millions of German soldiers attacking Russia, what could have attacked us, sooner or later that they got over the channel, well, it'd have been a different world to us. I wouldn't be here, because they probably would have used us as slave labour. But could this war have been avoided? Now, this is only my opinion again, I would say no. Sooner or later, this German war machine, which was probably as good a war machine as this world's ever seen, now, it wasn't just Hitler, it was all his henchmen and everybody else. They wanted to overrule all of Europe and make Germany the headquarters of the United Europe under German rules. And as I say, read your history books about the Jewish problem. How one nation can actually kill, was it 2.5 million Jews, starved them to death, burned them to death, and you think could it happen in modern? Well, it probably could. So I think I've come to the end of my story, and I do hope, as I said, you've learnt a little bit about it. And if you've not studied any or had lessons at school, I'd like you to go to your nearest library or buy a few war and read about how terrible it was, and especially, what would you think one of the worst things could happen to you in World War II? Personally, I think being a prisoner of the Japanese. There's men just literally worked and starved to death. Men, when the war of Japan was finished, And I said, well, I'm talking the Americans and all, not just British soldiers. Men what weighed 12 to 14 stone only weighed 5 and 6 stone. So how they survived being a Japanese prisoner of war, I should imagine that every soldier, every serviceman or woman will come home from Japan, being a Japanese prisoner of war after a year, they was either mentally or physically affected with it. Well, it was when we'd pulled back from Rencombe and we'd reached the parts of Oosterbeek where lots of fighting was going on. We got the orders one day that there were some German soldiers approaching us on bicycles. So actually, they didn't know we were there. So that was one easy part of the battle, because they were shot off the bikes and killed and didn't know we was even there. Yeah, we fired them when there was. When I say we, there was probably about half a dozen of us firing at them, and they had no chance. They was just shot riding the bicycles. Yeah, I believe there was about 10 Germans. I'd like to give me a little tale. One incident, I'd gone in. Most of the time we was out in the fields of the forest. Only 2 or 3 times we were under cover, and there's very strange things happening in wars besides terrible things. And I put my machine gun down, bent down, looked through the barn, which has no windows, I was on the ground floor, and about 100 yards from me there was a German soldier on his own, and he had a German grenade which had the long handling, and he was ready for throwing it where in the barn where I was, which would have killed me. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and I don't know who's more surprised being I couldn't get the machine gun up to shoot at him before he killed me. And to my great relief, he suddenly dropped his grenade and run backwards to where he'd come from. So that was one relief. And another time, the shelling had stopped, and this soldier I knew, he said to me, "Hey, stand up." I'd ginger her then, so they called me Ginger. That was my nickname. And he said, "Look, there's some American soldiers coming down the road here." And I looked up, and there's about 15 German soldiers coming towards us. They hadn't realised just we were there. But on spotting us, as I say, they beat a hasty retreat. So that was another time when if they'd decided to fire, we'd have lost our lives then. So is it fair? I keep saying this. Is it fair to a good look? Now, you want to ask me something else now, sir, do you? Yes. But I have been asked, what was it like to see somebody near you killed? And I don't think I can answer that. If I was being honest, I'd say, well, it could have easily been me, and I'm glad it wasn't. Is that self-preservation or what? I'm not sure. The Germans with the mortars and the artillery pieces, you stood in the slits end and your shoulders and the upwards are exposed, so you probably got down, and when you popped up, the man in the next trench would be lying dead or wounded. And after a few days of this continuous fighting, I thought to myself, I know I'm going to be killed, but I don't want to lie in a trench with an arm or a leg blown. I would rather be killed outright, which seems a dreadful way of considering that your life was coming to an end. But I didn't. The last thing I wanted to be left, because I've seen men, as I once saw them carry a man on a stretcher, and this German tank, a flame-throwing tank, had sent a flame in this house, and they'd probably killed the occupants of it. And when they carried the Germans, the stretcher bearers went to in the house after, and they picked him up, which I couldn't see of. They brought him out on a stretcher, and he was screaming for somebody to kill him. He was in, you can imagine, he was burnt from top to bottom. And I thought, I hope that doesn't happen to me. If I've got to go, please make it quick and clean. When they first started shelling and bombing, he was quite a distance off me, but I could hear him screaming, kill me, shoot me. Because you know, to be burnt from top to bottom, well, I don't doubt for 1 minute that within minutes he would have died. Now, this Bren gun, the magazine held 30 rounds, and you could fire it singly or automatic. If you pressed the button on the automatic, it fired all the 30, and you'd hope that if you could see, you was only firing when you could see a target. And this is one incident I probably remember quite well. I was in this house this day, very few, only 2 or 3 times undercover, and it was on the edge of a forest, and on the side of the forest, I could see these about a dozen German soldiers coming down, and they'd not seen me, and I know maybe it was hate, and I thought, right now, sooner or later you're going to come out in the clearance, and it's my turn now, my turn to get a bit what you've been doing to us. And they come out, gone in out to the woods, and I give them a burst of machine guns, and I think there was 3 or 4 lay on the floor. Now, I can't say I killed them, but I'd wounded them at least. And I felt maybe it was wrong for me to feel a little glow of, well, I've done a little bit to get back what they'd done at some of my comrades. And maybe it's wrong for me to even talk about things like that.
No, you should never be ashamed of that.
No.
Because you have to realize, sir, that every German or every Japanese that was killed, that's that many more British or American soldiers who get to come home, you know? Or Canadian or Australian soldiers that get to come home. Because if you didn't fire at the enemy, they would kill one of your friends, or they could kill you.
Yeah. Well, that's what I said. I suppose it's a slogan used by anywhere in the world. The slogan is kill or be killed. They're the enemy, and you don't consider you're killing a human, you're just killing the enemy.
Now, Wilf, you had mentioned you saw about 12 Germans, and when they came into the clearing, you opened fire.
Yeah.
And about 4 of them...
Maybe 4 or 5, as soon as I fired, naturally, they shot off back in the woods, but they left 4 or 5 behind. So I knew I'd done a little bit towards killing this. Somebody's were killing my comrades. Well, when they attacked and they got quite near, then you just got your machine gun and swerved it about, you see. And I don't know, I have read years ago, the law of averages, say you fire 100 rounds, or bullets, they're known as rounds in the army, you fire 100 bullets, and I think the law of averages, that only 2 or 3 find the mark, because it's just the law of average. If you, every time you fired, you couldn't guarantee that you'd even hit somebody, you know. Although you were trained to how to use these in close combat fighting.
When you were in combat at Arnhem, sir, what was the closest you got to the German infantry during a firefight?
Oh, maybe 100 yards. But when they got near us, you see, before they got so near us, our artillery in the Nijmegen Rooney had got the references of where they were over the wirelesses and and so they opened up fire and were shelling them, so they lost a lot of men before they got anywhere near us.
From your position, could you see the Allied artillery hitting the Germans?
More often than not, there was long before they got too near us. You see, because in the woods and forest, you could be only yards away from any enemy soldiers, and you could hear them talking, but you wouldn't see them. And vice versa, they could hear us.
Could you tell me, sir, some of your memories of going on patrol when you were fighting at Arnhem? Do you remember any of the patrols you went on?
Yeah. One patrol I went on, we went on a listening patrol, and to see how far off they were, and we were in this woods, and there was a hut in this forest, and I could see these Germans going in and out of it. But we'd had orders off the officer, we hadn't to fire, we was only trying to see what they was up to. And I found it very, very hard to obey his orders. I wanted to shoot at them, so that would be a few less. And a funny little tale I'll tell you about this, what you just asked me about. This happened in Italy. Before we stopped and Evan were no farther, Lieutenant Rowe took us, this is a funny tale to end with, took us on a listening patrol, and we walked about 3 miles, and we come to this village, and in the dark, and in the middle of the village, the Germans were burning papers, but we hadn't gone to attack them or nothing, so if we knew they were burning paper, we knew they was ready for retreating. But just before we got there, we passed a farmyard, and a dog come running out and were barking its head off, and our officer said, "Can one of you not shut that dog up?" These are little tales we'll always remember and laugh about it. So the bloke next to me said he had a packet of hard biscuits in his pocket, and he obviously he was a man as knew about dogs, and he calmed it down, stopped it barking, held this biscuit out to it, and we were at the side of a well. And he said, "I'll get you to this bloody thing." Picked the dog up and threw it in the well to drown it, to stop it making a row. And the well was obviously dry, the dog had landed, and it was barking, and Lieutenant Rowe said, "Every German in southern Italy knows we're here," so we had to make a hasty retreat. And I laughed about it many times, because his idea was if we destroy this, throw it in the well, it'll drown within seconds and shut it up. And the exact opposite.
While we're talking about Italy, thank you for sharing that funny story. I bet you the dog is still there barking to this day.
He threw it down this well. Maybe you think, oh, that's a sad... Well, anything to requieten it. And now another tale, not a tragic tale, I don't know what you'd make of this, but this, as I say, we'd gone in this house, and all the windows, I think they called them French windows then, they were like a patio window down to the floor, and they've always smashed in, they've been blown out. And I was on the right-hand side of the window, lay down with my machine gun, and my number 2, which was a Lance Corps, was on the other side of the window, and our sergeant come in at the back, and he hugged the wall and kicked bottom of my boots where I was lay down. Now he said, "Oldham," he said, "the last unit what come in here, they had 2 or 3 men shot with a sniper. So if you want to go across for a magazine or to say something to your Lance Corporal, go back the way and go, can you understand me? Go back to the back wall where they can't see you, go across the back and then up that side of the wall. Have you got the message?" I said, "Yes, Sergeant." And what did he do? He walked in front of the window, and there was a plop, and he got shot in the stomach doing something that he told me not to do. And he survived the war, I believe. I didn't know it for years, but he was shoot prisoner wounded. He was shot in the stomach. And within seconds, he'd gone a greyish colour. I think it was shocking. I thought he'd be dead in 10 minutes, but he didn't. He survived.
Did you have to provide first aid to him, or what
No.
happened? Because he was right next to you.
Well, he was, only a yard or two from me. And, we carried what we called field dressings. They were like a bandage, as you could, to try and stop the flow, but on a shell dressing, which was like a big bandage with a pad on, and you could put the pad and bandage it tight round him. And somebody undid his tunic and opened his pants and put the shell dressing on. And then, within 5 minutes, we had to move out to this house. So that was the end of the story, but Sergeant the Monkey was called. And but it was years and years after I found out that he was to a German, would he know some better, and he recovered. I was certain that he wouldn't last 5 minutes.
This happened in Arnhem.
This was at Arnhem, yes, aye.
Why do you think, after telling you, not to do that, why did he do that, in your opinion?
Why?
Why did he do exactly what he told you not to do?
Well, as I say, he told me not to walk across the front of the window. Well, what had been window, because there were sniper, and the last unit what had been in minutes before us said he killed 2 of their soldiers and they couldn't see him. But in his forgetfulness, he did the exact thing he told me to do. He did himself and got shot for his troubles.
You think he just forgot? After telling you, he forgot?
Well, he did it automatically, you see.
Oh.
Instead of going back, as he told me to do, he automatically turned round and walked across and bang, and that was it. He had this plop and he was wounded.